People ask me, why did you form a big band? It's so economically unfeasible to maintain. It's because I had to. Because of the big band, in terms of jazz, is the highest form of musical expression. From a playing standpoint, from a compositional standpoint, and from an arranging standpoint, there's nothing more grandeur, more majestic than the art of the big band. What's unique about the Multiverse Big Band? There are no musical boundaries. I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City, and I was exposed to a multitude of musical styles, from hardcore salsa, which is the way we play Cuban music in New York with a freaking New Yorican attitude, to funk, soul, R&B, disco, jazz, forget about it. We grew up with it here in New York City, and of course, we play it all here in the Multiverse. We've been very fortunate because all of our previous albums have been nominated for Grammys with the Multiverse Big Band. What's special about this one is it's entirely vocals, and we're featuring on this new work 3 of the greatest contemporary jazz vocalists today: the one and only Janice Siegel from the Manhattan Transfer, the one and only Antoinette Montague, who is a blues and jazz titan, and the one and only Jennifer J. Ledesma, who is a fellow Bronxite, and she's a multilingual powerhouse. I'm one lucky band leader. All of the repertoire on this new album represents my musical journey growing up in the South Bronx in New York City. So you're gonna hear authentic salsa, hardcore and in your face. You're gonna hear authentic R&B. You're gonna hear authentic swinging big band jazz, and much, much more Brazilian music, funk, Puerto Rican rhythms. It's all that in a bag of chips, as we would say here in New York City, and it represents what we are in the Multiverse. The feeling I want the audience to get when they come to see us live in performance or hear us on recordings is to be inspired by all of the cultures that I represent through this music with this incredible big band. And as well as that, I want them to learn something about all of the cultures that are represented by the different forms of music that we play, all under the rubric of the jazz world, where there are no boundaries, especially in the Multiverse.
Of lonely nights, waiting for someone to release me.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. Musicians are the vanguard of the species, the researchers of the soul. Performing and composing music needs to be an all-consuming vocation and passion, a devoted calling grounded in the spirit, subversive in its power to speak social justice and truths honestly and with integrity. As Cornel West puts it, that's even more necessary in America today, where art is judged in relation to its market value, where everything is for sale. Music challenges systematic terror, oppression, and human catastrophe with beauty rather than violence. It evokes who we are, what it means to be human, connects us to each other, connects the present with the past of our grandparents, the present and past of others on the other side of the world. As we listen to their music, we learn about ourselves. It's the same humanity. My guest today on The Radical Imagination is the epitome of that artist. He's performed and recorded with every major figure in the world of Latin jazz and salsa. Every one of his 7 big band recordings have been nominated for Grammys. Bobby Sanabria is a product of his vibrant environment. A New Yorican, a person of Puerto Rican descent growing up in New York City. And in his case, it was the South Bronx, during a time when pop, jazz, R&B, rock, funk, and Latin music of all kinds coexisted as equals. Bobby's newest Grammy-nominated album is an entire vocal album framed by his multiverse big band, collaborating with 3 of today's greatest contemporary singing talents. He's captured all the aki, the energy, the hipness, the love and cool that sets New York apart with a New Yorkian energy that brings us all together.
Yeah.
You're bringing us all together.
Thank you so much for inviting me, James.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a blessing to have you here.
Likewise.
And
likewise for me to be
to
here.
talk about this incredible new album here. And the Grammys are going to be what, in mid-February?
February 4th.
February 4th.
We'll finally find out if we finally win. You know,
Well,
I've been nominated 9 times.
9 times, okay.
With this current nomination,
Right.
both in the mainstream Grammys and the Latin Grammys. So this is for the mainstream Grammys, and we're nominated in the category of Latin jazz. So we're very proud to represent the category. And since I'm here publicly, I want to congratulate my fellow nominees too.
Well, please do. Yeah. Who are you?
Luciana Souza from Brazil, Ivan
Okay.
Lins from Brazil, Liana Elias from Brazil, and from my ancestral homeland, Puerto Rico, the great Miguel Zenon, who's nominated in a duo album with Luis Perdomo. Miguel plays
Right.
alto sax, and Miguel is from Venezuela. Miguel plays alto saxophone, and Luis is from Venezuela, and he plays piano. So.
It must make you feel so wonderful that this music now is becoming so much part of the larger community, that you have yourself been promoting and working on for so long.
Well, yes and no. I would say that if you talked to me 30 years ago,
Yeah.
I would have told you, yes, the music is going to finally become mainstream, what we call Latin-oriented jazz. And sadly, that has not happened. I thought at that time it would. We had great artists like Maestro Tito Puente, Paquito de Rivera, Eddie Palmieri,
Right.
and Jorge Dalto, and many more that were making inroads. Tania Maria from Brazil, Ayeto Moreira from Brazil, and others that were playing at major jazz festivals, putting out fantastic recordings. Magazines were writing about these artists, interviewing them, etc. And we came on the scene 25 years ago with my multiverse big band,
Right.
and our first album released in 2000, Live at Enclave, which was recorded live at Birdland in New York City, was nominated for a Grammy. So we were in the mix of things. And if somebody would have asked me back then, what do you think is going to happen by the year 2023? I would say, you're going to see these types of groups on major talk shows, Saturday Night Live, etc., Jimmy Kimmel, all these shows that exist today. But unfortunately, not. That's why this new album, Vox Humana, the album cover is the way it is, with me screaming at that microphone. obviously.
To be heard.
Yes,
So what
yes.
happened 25, 30 years ago? It was on a roll here, and
Well,
happened?
there was an explosion of recordings coming out. There was Cuba had opened up, and so many Cuban musicians were coming here, and they're still coming here. But back then, there was a big emphasis on that happening, and there were many Brazilian musicians coming here as well, making an impact, especially in New York City. And there were groups in the mainstream jazz world that had already been experimenting since the 1970s using our rhythms.
Such as?
Weather Report, and others. The guitarist Al Di Meola.
Right.
And of course, everybody knows Santana.
Right, right.
So he, in many ways, was our first superstar. There were other people before him, Richie Valens, etc., that had crossed over into the mainstream.
But Santana was Woodstock. He
became ubiquitous, and it was great because he still is very influenced by jazz, and he's still out there performing on a major level. But he was playing all the major jazz festivals, the major rock festivals, and he incorporated Afro-Cuban and Brazilian rhythms, like he still does today, in a big, huge way.
Did you ever play with him?
No, well, once.
Once.
Believe it or not, at the Beacon Theater, I was playing with the Tito Puente Orchestra, and there was, I forgot what year it was, probably in the 80s. There was a big mudslide that happened in Mexico at the time that killed several hundred people, and there was some benefits happening here in New York, and there was one that was done at the Beacon Theater, and we were involved. I was part of the Tito Puente Orchestra. Jimmy Frizaro Olsen calls me up, who managed the band. He managed the contracting of the musicians, and he was also Tito's lead trumpeter for many years and played. He was Tito's best friend. He goes, "Hey, Bobby, we got a gig at the Beacon Theater.
Yeah.
Santana's going to play with us." So we played Oye Como Va, which a lot of people think Santana wrote, but it was really Tito Puente who wrote it.
Right.
Back in 1962. So, and we got to talk backstage, and then, and it was funny. He goes to me, "Here's my number. Call me if you're ever in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area." And I lost his number. So,
well, wait a minute. So you did play. You did.
Yeah,
play.
we played together. Yeah, but oddly enough, I got to be good friends with his brother, Jorge Santana, great guitarist who had a group called Malo.
Yeah.
Which the best way I could describe Malo was it was Santana on steroids because he had a horn section.
Whoa. Right.
So two trumpets and a trombone. So that band was powerful, and occasionally a saxophone, tenor saxophone. So that band was very powerful. Jorge, I was a big fan of because of that group Malo, and many of your viewers probably that are my age and your age remember they had a big hit back then called Suavecito, which was a bolero in English. So later on, years later, performing with Larry Harlow at the Tokyo Blue Note in Japan, Jorge was a guest with us for the whole week. So we became good friends, and we would always talk occasionally on the phone, etc. And he's always, I said, "I don't know why Carlos hasn't called you, this, that, and the other," you know, that kind of a thing. But that's just the way things are in this business. I mean, sometimes you don't cross paths with people.
But this is the time again, the breadth and scope of your background and all the people that you've played with. Sly and the Family Stone, right? Sly is still out on the West Coast, isn't he?
No, he's not performing anymore. No, but the people from the 70s, the 70s that to me was the most creative time period in music, from my opinion, that are still performing. You have Tower of Power still performing.
You were very influenced by them,
yes,
right?
Indeed.
As a kid?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Particularly Dave Garibaldi, the drummer. And parenthetically, Emilio Castillo is Latino, the leader of the band. And who else is from that era? Santana, obviously. And they happen to be both from the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area, and the Manhattan Transfer, who just retired a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
After 51 years.
And you have the lead singer from Manhattan Transfer is on.
Yes, on this new recording, Janice Siegel, one of the
Janice
singers.
Siegel.
Yeah.
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 Incredible.
So it's kind of, for me, it's interesting because when I first met Janice, I told her, "Wow, I've been a big fan of yours since I'm a kid." And she goes, "What are you trying to say? I'm an old lady?" Because she's from Brooklyn and I'm from the Bronx, so we kid each other about that. But I'm so lucky she's on the recording along with Antoinette Montague, who's just a powerhouse in terms of the blues and jazz tradition. And the other vocalist, Jennifer J. Ledesma, she's a Bronxite like me. She's half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, and she sings in 11 languages.
Wow.
And is fluent in 4.
Wow.
So she sings in 3 languages on the album: Brazilian, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. But she's an amazing, amazing young artist. And she happened to be a student of mine many years ago at the New School. So I'm glad that she's got an opportunity to be.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. You're going back to the big band era.
Right.
Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton, and you're including now, this is an all-vocal album.
And we have yet a 4th vocalist in the band, which is our great conga player, Orestes Abrantes, who's featured on 2 tunes on the album, singing. And we recorded this under the most dangerous of conditions, which is live. We did it at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola in New York City, like we did this previous album, West Side Story Reimagined. So I'm very proud of the musicians, and if we win this, it'd be great because the musicians, they deserve it. People don't understand. We spend most of our lives. We don't spend most of our lives performing. We spend most of our lives traveling and practicing. The amount of time that we put in, we devote to doing what we do on a virtuosic level on stage, particularly in orchestral music, classical music, and jazz is just ridiculous. So when you hear this recording and you hear the people applauding and you hear the band perform, it's the fruition of all of those years of being in the practice room.
Studying.
That's right.
Practicing, months and months and years for the 2 or 3 hours that you are performing.
It's not
on
even
stage.
that sometimes, So as I said, you spend most of your time traveling. You could ask any musicians that have traveled extensively. They'll tell you, you spend more time traveling than performing. So as we did at Dizzy's, we performed for 3 nights. The 3rd night, the band was just on fire, and that's what you hear on here.
And this is not a studio recording. This
Right,
is
it's
live.
live.
So you
Right.
like that. You like On the Edge. To be on the edge?
It's you get it's a different kind of energy.
Yeah.
The studios, there's pressure in the studio because you have to perform. Studio time costs a lot of money. But when you perform live, that's it. You don't get another chance to do it over again. So
I saw you perform West Side Story Reimagined
Right.
in by Lincoln Center there, outdoors.
that was an amazing performance because the estimate was between 10 to 15,000 people were there.
Yeah.
So it was gratifying for us. And I remember an older woman came up to me afterwards and said, she congratulated me saying, "You brought the city together. You brought the city together."
It was the summer.
That's right. It was, I believe it was
July or August? Or?
August. It was,
Yeah,
I think,
I
August 17th or 18th.
People were dancing.
That's right.
Dancing in
and then we had
front there.
We had like about almost 1,000 photos projected behind us, in sync with various movements of the music. That was provided by my good friends Seis del Sur, which is a collective of New Yorican photographers, including David Gonzalez from the New York Times, who's a good friend of mine, Joe Conzo Jr., and others, Angel Franco, Ricky Flores, et cetera, So they just, when I told them about the concept that I have, some of them didn't understand it. But finally, when we, in our final meetings, they got it. So,
Look, where do you get this energy? You talk so much about energy. I think you referred to it in the album.
Ache. Yeah.
Now, what is that? What possession?
Well,
by
basically,
Afro-Cuban spirits.
yeah, it's a
what
word.
is that?
It's
Tell
a word.
us.
It's a word we inherited from West Africa, from the Yoruba people who were brought here during the colonial period, particularly to Cuba, and the concept of Ache, as it's said in Cuba, and Ashe, as it's said in Brazil, is that there is this positive energy force in the multiverse, and out there.
Not
And
the universe now.
Yeah.
The multiverse. It's an important distinction you make.
That's right.
Tell our audience about that.
Well, originally the band was called the Bobby Sanabria Big Band 25 years ago when I started. And then because of all the different rhythms that we do, from the Afro-Latin traditions, Brazilian rhythms, Cuban rhythms, Puerto Rican rhythms, excuse me, Colombian rhythms, Venezuelan rhythms, it goes on and on. And then of course, the things that developed here in the United States, from African American tradition, funk, rock, R&B, et cetera, rap, hip hop, I had to come up with something that represented that. And my incredible wife, Elena Martinez, who's a noted folklorist, she says, what you guys do is what Octavio Paz talks about, the great Mexican writer, the multiverse. And she showed me a passage from one of his writings, one of his essays, talking about that Latin America is a multiverse. It's like a big gigantic salad bowl with all of these great flavors in it, etc. But even though it's all together and giving you this incredible unified, great taste, you can see all the different colors, all the different ingredients in it. And then of course I'm a fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who happens to be half Puerto Rican.
Didn't know that.
He runs the Hayden Planetarium here in New York City.
Right.
Incredible, visible advocate for science and astronomy, etc. And he talks about, I saw him once speaking about the concept of the multiverse on TV. So I said, I have to change the name of the band. So in 2012, I changed the name of the band to the Multiverse Big Band. And that was, and parenthetically, we did an album called Multiverse, and that was nominated for 2 Grammys. So that's the origin of the name.
You listen to music much of the time, right?
All the time.
All the time. Do you travel much to these different countries, particularly in Latin or South America?
I have.
Africa?
Yeah.
And what do you do there? How do you pick up the
Well,
sounds and energy there? Or what's your way of doing this?
A lot of people think it is exciting to go to different places, but traveling it wears you out.
Yeah.
It kills you.
Yeah.
Basically. But I've been to many of the places that I've mentioned that we draw upon in terms of rhythms. Colombia, Venezuela, etc. My ancestral homeland, Puerto Rico, Cuba, several times. I've traveled all through Europe. And the main thing that I try to do is soak up as much culture as I can. Meet with the locals when we have a day off, hopefully. Ask around. Hey, I like to go to see a lot of I like to soak up the architecture of a lot of the churches, especially in Europe. And you can see the genius of people that lived hundreds upon hundreds of years ago.
And you listen to the church music because you were raised Catholic.
I was raised Catholic, yes, and I was lucky because where I grew up in the South Bronx in the Melrose Projects. My parents was Immaculate Conception, which happens to have the largest structurally the largest church in the Bronx, and we used to go to Spanish Mass when we were kids because of the burgeoning Puerto Rican community. They made a Spanish Mass, but they wouldn't let us into the main church. They put us in the chapel.
Why not? Why?
Well,
Well, all right. Yeah, well, okay, we can get to. So
that's
you were-
another story. But
that's another story, right.
but I would hear the hymns sung in Spanish,
Right.
and we were very fortunate. We had an African American woman playing organ, and she would occasionally. I didn't know it at the time. I was a little kid, but she would occasionally play chords that came from the jazz vocabulary, rich, lush chords that you would hear any competent jazz pianist playing today or the pianists of the day back then. And the people would naturally sometimes follow those harmonies that the organist rather would play. And you get these incredible jazz harmonies
In the congregation.
right.
People listening.
And they didn't know they were doing that. And they were,
And you joined in?
well, I was just bombarded by it, sitting in the back, and I'm going, oh wow, the hairs on the back of your head would stand
And
up.
you're 12 years old.
No, this was younger. This
Younger
was younger.
even.
I'm like 5, 6.
5, 6 years old. Oh,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
goodness.
And you're hearing all of that. And then the neighborhood that I grew up in, the Melrose houses were predominantly African American. And I was the beneficiary of that culture because I'm exposed to it every day, walking out in the building, hearing people talking, using expressions that are the vernacular of African American speak back then. And there were still in the South Bronx, there were still some Italian families, Irish families, Polish families,
Jewish?
and Jewish obviously, and there was even some Germans. The meat market we used to get our meat from, I used to accompany my mother. She didn't know English. The woman behind the counter didn't know English. She spoke German. My mother spoke Spanish. Somehow through sign language and pointing, etc., they'd communicate. And of course, the local barbershop, I remember this distinctly, it was Italian.
Yeah.
My father used to go in there, bring me. They'd speak, but they would speak Italian. My father would speak Spanish.
They had
Very-
the opera on, maybe? They were, who knows what?
No, they were just talking stuff, like as we would
Talking
say.
stuff, okay.
And they would speak in Italian, Italian English. My father speaks Spanish English. Italian's very similar to Spanish. So there was always a gentleman dressed in black with these racing forms sitting in the corner. I asked my father, who's that guy? He goes, don't worry about it. And then
Wow.
next to the bodega,
Yeah.
there was on the street corner where I grew up, East 153rd Street and Cortlandt Avenue, which later I found out back in the 19th century was called Dutch Broadway, late 19th, early 20th century, because in that avenue were Germans living there at one time. So anyway, next to the bodega was a black barber shop. And I remember this distinctly. Once I walked by one time in the summer and the door was open. There was no air conditioning back then. There were two barbers. One was sitting, the other one was cutting, straightening out a gentleman's hair who was white. He was either Italian or Jewish or whatever. Yeah. And they would use a product called concholine, which was it was lye-based to straighten out one's hair. So I'm standing there looking in shock. I'm like 6 years old, 7. It was a summer, and the barber goes to me, "What's the matter, young man? You never seen a white boy get his hair conked before?" So
it's a lot to take in for a little 5 or 6 year old kid.
Yeah, but it's
good.
It was these little lessons in life showed me the similarities,
It's
the
all
things
one
in
humanity.
common.
Yeah.
It's all about humanity. So, I mean, the guy in the barber chair is laughing. The other barber with the newspaper is laughing, and the barber straightening out his hair is barber. And then I says, "Well, yeah, who's the guy? If you got curly hair, where you gonna go to get your hair straightened? A black barber." So, those kind of experiences growing up in the South Bronx all informed me. There was a gospel church down the block. We lived the project building that I lived on is on a hill, and you walk it's on a slow incline going down from Cortlandt Avenue down to Morris Avenue in the South Bronx. And right there on that corner, and that church is still there. And I'd hear them singing gospel music. So I'd walk by occasionally, you know, on Sunday afternoons, and they're hooting and hollering and playing the tambourines and everything.
Did you take up an instrument? What happened to you at that point? Did you study formally with anyone, or you just?
No, at that
What
time
happened?
I was just being bombarded by all these
Right.
influences.
When did you start?
Well, what happened was I would see like groups. Well, I saw the Beatles like we all did on TV on the Ed Sullivan Show. But Ed Sullivan was great because you had a variety of music that you would see. I'd see people that later on I would get to play with, like Candido, the great Cuban conguero, Sophie, the great vocalist from Puerto Rico, Maestro Tito Puente, and others. I mean, it's ridiculous the people I saw at that time, not knowing that later on I would get to play with them.
Right.
You sing jazz and hearing jazz on all the variety shows.
Listening to Felipe Luciano, right?
And I was
his show.
During grammar, when I was in grammar school, I'm listening to Felipe Luciano, one of the founders of the Young Lords Party.
Absolutely.
He had a show called the Latin Roots on Sundays on WRVR, which used to be our 24-hour jazz station. Learning from him about artists that I never had heard about before. Arsenio Rodriguez from Cuba, Melodía de los 40 from Cuba, groups like that. And he would give a historical perspective and interview these musicians that became my heroes, like Tito Puente, like Eddie Palmieri, etc. So all of this is happening. And the great thing about New York City at that time, which no longer exists, is you heard the sound of conga drums in every Hispanic neighborhood in the summertime. So in the evenings in the summer, you'd hear llegó Superman, pero llegó Superman, bailando guaguanco. You hear the sound of conga drums playing Cuban guaguanco, rumba. Puerto Ricans, we playing that. But you'd also see African Americans participating in that in the parks. You'd see Jews, Italians watching, etc., and getting into it as well. So we have a saying in Spanish, in the Caribbean, el tambor llama, the drum calls, and it did. And that's when I started watching and listening and learning. Like through oral tradition, you learn.
Yeah.
Just like in Africa you would learn, or in the Caribbean or Central South America, same thing in New York City.
And the drum became your focal point. That you felt
Well,
was
by the
why?
time I was 12 years old, the coup de grace was I saw Tito Puente performing in front of my project building. There was an outdoor concert. The city at that time was bankrupt, and private donors gave money to the city so that musicians would be hired to perform in low-income areas to keep the natives restless from rioting, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a lot of street concerts, and one of them was Maestro Tito Puente, the great Machito and his Afro-Cubans, the fathers of Afro-Cuban jazz with his big band, and Ricardo Rey and Bobby Cruz. Ricardo Rey was Juilliard-trained, Puerto Rican, New York from Brooklyn. Bobby Cruz, great vocalist. They had a band together. Doc Cheatham, the great jazz trumpeter, was playing with them.
on your corner, on your street
Right.
corner.
And they all played there
Right.
in a concert. And that freaked me out, blew me away. And I saw Tito Puente playing Vamos, rumbero que la rumba ya. Forget it. He points to the saxophones, they stand up like he's a mighty king commanding his troops or a general. And then he takes this explosive timbale. I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I had some talent. I could imitate what was going on and everything. I would hear things on the recordings, imitate them, cowbell patterns, drum set patterns, everything. And at the same time, I was becoming enamored with jazz. So when I saw the
The
Beatles,
small band, or which
it
jazz
was mostly
performers?
big bands
Big
because
bands,
because
still
I saw
influence.
them on shows like I mentioned before. I saw on the Johnny Carson Tonight Show that incredible big band they had. The
And
David
Doc
Short,
Severs.
yeah, Doc Severinsen was the trumpeter and the leader of the band. The
Buddy Rich.
Dr. Billy Taylor
Right.
was the pianist. He was the leader of the band on the David Frost Show. Mike Douglas had a jazz, like a four-horn jazz combo on his show. He was in the afternoons, and they'd have all these great musical guests on there. Everybody. That's how I saw Frank Zappa for the first time on the Dick Cavett show. So then they'd have Johnny Carson loved Buddy Rich, the great jazz
Yes,
drummer.
Buddy Rich
He'd have
was on
him
a lot.
as a guest. He'd have Dizzy Gillespie, all these great musicians. So a lot of people from my generation talk about they fell in love with drums watching Ringo with the Beatles. I saw Ringo and I liked what he did, but when
Yeah.
I saw people like Sonny Payne with Count Basie, or Buddy Rich with his big band, and Sam Woodyard with Duke Ellington, I would go, man, these drummers are on another level, man. It's like,
But then you also went into a very formal training at one of the greatest conservatories in the country, Berkeley.
oh, the Berklee College of Music, yeah.
So what happened?
Well, what happened was real quick.
Okay.
It's a long story, but
all right.
I was in high school band. I went to Cardinal Hayes High School in the South Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations to my alma mater. They just won the New York State Catholic High School Football Championship.
All right.
For those of you who don't know Cardinal Hayes High School, that's where Martin Scorsese went. George Carlin went there for a short time period. Regis Philbin went there. Jose Madera, the great arranger and percussionist in the Latin music scene as well. His brother went there as well. A great bassist. Anyway, so Mr. William Ryan was the high school band director. Then he taught me, he showed me what it was to be a professional musician. There was a gentleman by the name of David Carmona, trumpet player. We went to a grammar school from the 6th to the 8th grade in Manhattan, Monsignor William R. Kelly, which was a school for gifted kids from the hood. Anyway, David was into music like me. He played trumpet, and he was self-taught but very advanced. So
And you went there as well?
I went to Monsignor William R. Kelly as well. That's how we became friends. Then we went to Cardinal Hayes in the South Bronx, and we were in high school band together. We were the only two people in the band that were serious about being musicians. And we had formed a band, and we were playing with little local bands around there in the salsa scene. I was playing timbales, some drum set. And David, one day, I walk into the band room to try to practice a little snare drum before anybody got there. And he had a catalog in his hand. It said Berklee College of Music. And I said, what's this? He goes, man, this is where Quincy Jones went, and all these other great musicians. So I said, wow. So our goal was to audition for the school. Mr. Ryan found out, he started laughing. He says, you'll never pass you might pass the physical audition,
Right.
but you'll never pass the theory test.
And no Puerto Rican had ever been.
There was nobody
accepted
there.
it,
Nobody.
right?
And
Yeah.
David was Costa Rican.
Okay.
I was Puerto Rican. And Mr. Ryan just laughed at us. Says, you'll never, ever pass the theory exam. You don't have enough knowledge yet. He said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. If you stay out of detention, stay out of trouble, I'll give you theory lessons Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays after school for about half an hour to an hour. And he did. And we passed and got in.
Wow.
And I was the first Puerto Rican, to my knowledge, there because I asked. There was nobody there. There were like 3 Brazilians, David, who's Costa Rican, and me, who was Puerto Rican. And nobody there knew who Tito Puente was, Eddie Palmieri, Charlie Palmieri, nothing. The only thing they knew was Santana. And maybe a few artists like Milton Nascimento from Brazil, because Milton had recorded with Wayne Shorter an album called Native Dancer, and Wayne was playing with Weather Report at the time. So I was dumbfounded, I was dumbfounded with the cultural ignorance that existed at the school. In fact, we
You
were
educated them.
yeah, we were invisible.
Well,
We were invisible. I mean, people used to knock on my dorm room door and say, "Hey, you're Sanabria, right? By Roberto, right?" I go, "Yeah, you're the one with the Latin records, right?" He goes, "Yeah, can I borrow some? Could I?" I said, "No, but you could come in and you could listen."
but
So I would come. They'd come in and
yeah.
and we'd have, we'd sit down and in my own primitive way try to explain what was happening.
And a few years later, you come out with West Side Story reimagined.
Well, that's the fruition of
Tell-
a long journey, but
Right. Okay. And you immerse yourself in a sense, right, with American classical music, Copland, Bernstein. I mean, you called me up one time, and this a few days ago, and I was listening to Horowitz playing Rachmaninoff.
Right.
And you commented, yeah, he has the technique that all the Russian pianists. You blew me away.
Yeah.
I mean, so and then you also said, right, that some of that technique was also borrowed, or it became part of the Afro-Cuban rhythm.
Well, most of especially
it's unbelievable.
Especially in Cuba, they when Cuba had that relationship with Russia.
Right.
They sent teachers over to Cuba, and the
Interesting.
Russian system is based all on technical virtuosity.
Yeah.
And with the theory being, if you have technical virtuosity, you can do everything, But obviously, you have to put human emotion and expression into that. So in Cuba, the musicians, that has carried over in their training, and they're very technically brilliant, et cetera, et cetera. And we have that same kind of brilliance, but in the United States, but in another way. The brilliance of the African American experience that gave us jazz, the blues, which is the mother of everything. So,
which also influenced people like Copland, who influenced Bernstein.
Of course,
right? And then you,
or Bernstein.
Bernstein. Sorry, and take us through that. Your connection to that music and this album where you reimagine.
Yeah, well, very quickly, I mean, my journey after college, I started playing with Mongo Santamaria, legendary conguero, and many other great musicians like Maestro Tito Puente, working with him, Luis Perico Ortiz, working with people in the jazz world like Dizzy Gillespie and others. So Charles McPherson, just to name a few real quick. But and I finally in 1990 I formed this band called Ascensión, which still exists till this day, and it's a 9-member ensemble. But then by 1998 I had always wanted to tackle forming a big band, but I had felt I wasn't ready. I didn't have enough knowledge, even though I had all this great technical knowledge that I had inherited. I had gotten from Berkeley, which I'm forever grateful for. And there I met a man by the name of Keith Copeland, who was from New York City, African American, one of the few African American teachers at the school who changed my life as a drummer. He gave me all the tools to do what I do today. So when you see me, you see in Keith, combined with Tito Puente, combined with Max Roach, Billy Cobham, Buddy Rich, all those influences. I had to mention his name because he's so important part of my life. So by 1998, I felt I was ready to start a big band. And I did, and we recorded in 1999 our first album, Afro-Cuban Dream Live in Enclave, and we did it live at Birdland in New York City, and that was nominated for a Grammy. And every subsequent album since we've done since then has been nominated for a Grammy. So we've been very fortunate. And the West Side Story project came about because it was the 60th anniversary of the
1961 came out, right?
The show originally premieres on Broadway in 57.
57, okay.
So the year I was born. So it was the 60th anniversary back in 2017, 18. 2017. So to celebrate my birthday, 60th birthday, and also the 60th anniversary of West Side Story, we did a whole Afro-Latin rhythmic treatment of the entire score. I had to ask permission of the Bernstein family, meet them, etc.
Which they readily agreed to, and And
Yes,
we're
yes.
so positive about
Yeah, originally it was
what you
performed
produced, what you
with my students at Manhattan School of Music.
right.
And I learned two things. The students were not, the music was just too hard for them, especially for the brass. And also it was too long. So I began editing everything and I said, I have to record this with my own band. And we did. And the result was that it was nominated for a Grammy, but we lost, but we won something bigger. We won the Jazz Journalists Association Album of the Year,
Reached #1.
which we reached #1 on the jazz charts, radio charts. But we're
Right.
also, we won that award, the Jazz Journalists Association Award, Album of the Year. That meant all of the greatest jazz writers in the country and the world voted that this was the best album of 2018 to 2019.
Yeah.
So this is the follow-up album, Vox Humana, and it's very representative of my life. That's why it has a very much personal connection, because
You
all
say,
of the pieces.
Yeah, you say it's the most autobiographical.
Yeah,
right?
all of the pieces have something to do with my life.
That you're bringing all together, and these wonderful vocalists that you brought in. Now, why did you make it an all vocal album?
That's another interesting story. Originally, it was supposed to be an album in dedication to my ancestral homeland, Puerto Rico. We had all of the music rehearsed. We had all the music prepared. We were booked for 3 nights at Dizzy's to do it, and COVID hit.
Huh.
So 1 month before we were supposed to go on, so I'm knocking my head, this, that, and I said, well, maybe this is a blessing in disguise, because I've always wanted to do this vocal project. So I started thinking about it. A couple of the pieces that were supposed to be on the album dedicated to Puerto Rico are on this album, like Caravan and Eddie Palmieri's Mi Congo and Eddie Palmieri's Puerto Rico, Maestro Eddie Palmieri. And but the rest, all are pieces that I picked to feature the vocalists.
The American
So-
Songbook, too, right? Or some of the.
Well, a piece like Caravan,
Yeah.
which is part of the American Songbook. It was
Right.
written by the great Juan Tizol, great Puerto Rican valve trombonist.
Right.
That's part of the American Songbook. It's part of the American Jazz Standard Songbook. That was another piece that was going to be on this album dedicated to Puerto Rico. But the others, like we do a version of a piece of music that Christina Aguilera recorded 25 years ago. And she happens to be a half Ecuadorian. She's a Latina, powerful voice. She's an icon in pop music. But Janice, who's on the album, calls me up and says, you know the song Genie in a Bottle? I said, yeah, Christina Aguilera. I got an arrangement that a friend of mine did, Andrew Nail. And I said, oh, well, I don't know, Janice. He goes, well, why don't you hear it first? So I drove it with, I was at that time teaching at NYU. I did it with my student big band there. And I says, the only thing I did was I told Janice, something has to be changed. The ending has to be more bombastic. And she goes, well, you tell the arranger. And I told him that, and he fixed it. He adjusted it. And we imagine Christina Aguilera singing with the Count Basie Orchestra roaring behind her.
Wow. Yeah.
So that we did that, and then Janice, through her great encyclopedic knowledge of pop music history and R&B history, she said, remember that song Spooky?
Yeah.
I said, I remember that
Sure,
song.
sure.
Yeah. It was instrumental hit
Like
first.
A girl like you. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike Shapiro did it first, the alto and tenor player, and then the Classics 4 wrote lyrics to it, and then 10 years later, or 12 years later, 13 years later, a group, the Atlanta Rhythm Section, redid it in 1977. It was a hit like 3 times.
Yeah.
So she goes, I have this demo that I did with Christian McBride, the great bassist. So I heard it. I said, we got to do this, but blow it up to the big band, play it authentically like a cha-cha-cha, but with all that R&B flavor. And there you go, man. So.
Is there any way, a reason why you have 3 female vocalists?
Yes, because I've always wanted to do something with 3 vocalists, and they had to be females. because that female energy, et cetera, they had to be each one of them distinctive stylistically within their own identity, but they all had to be all legitimate jazz singers as well, improvisers. A lot for me, a legitimate jazz singer is somebody that improvises, that can scat. Some people viewing this would go, well, what about Billie Holiday? There are always exceptions to the rule. Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett as well are examples. But a real legitimate jazz singer has to be able to improvise. So, and 3 is the number of Elegua in the religion known as Santeria, which is the Afro-Cuban representation of Ifa, the sacred truths of the mighty Yoruba people in West Africa that we inherited through the colonial period in Cuba, then to Puerto Rico.
The Earth Mother, in a sense.
I would say that, no. Elegua is the avatar of Ache.
Okay.
He is the
positive energy.
He is the gateway to the multiverse. So 3 is his number. And so that there's symbolism in there. I'm very much in many ways like Bernstein, Leonard Maestro Bernstein. He was into numerology and the significance of numbers.
Really?
And finding connections with things. So.
And it just, we should touch on this before, but you're interested in social activism.
Right.
How is that weaved into all of this in your own mind or efforts?
The way I look at the band and anything I do, I look
at political statement.
When I come on the bandstand, whether people know it or not, it is a socio-political statement. The band, when you see the band, it's multi-generational, it's multiracial, multi-ethnic. There's women in the band. I mean, it's all that and a bag of chips, as we would say in the South Bronx. So it just when the band walks out on stage, it's a socio-political statement of what? Really just love. And that's all it is. And how we have more things in common than differences. I'm always amazed at the fact that human beings can create such incredible beauty through art, whether it's music, dance, theater, poetry, painting, etc. But we do such horrific things at the same time.
Why don't we try to organize something along the Middle East? Let's organize something where people can listen to each other's music, even in these darkest of times.
Well, when we perform, we always do that. I mean, we have.
I'm talking about Palestinian and Israelis and Iraqis,
well, in many ways,
Iranians, and so on.
In many ways,
we can do this.
In many ways, at where I teach the New School, the Arabic students, Palestinian, and the Jewish students they're together, man. They just they talk amongst themselves about how crazy everything is. So we just need. Listen. As anybody knows, the first step in a romance is speaking to the person. So we just need to
having
speak to
that
each
courage
other.
and getting up and saying,
"Would you like to dance?"
Yeah.
Or like, "What's your name? Where are you from? Tell me something. What do you do?" Et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are things that we as New Yorkers we used to do more. I think more in the past.
Yeah.
And we've kind of sort of forgotten about that because everybody's so busy trying to make a buck, to stay alive, et cetera, but we need to get back to that. We have times during the year when we get to do that it's always on a transient, temporary level. Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas,
let's do it.
Kwanzaa.
Thank you for bringing that sense of love and community to us all. And this time is going to be the time you're going to win this thing.
Hopefully.
All right?
Let's see.
We got to do that. Multiverse, big band, Vox Humana. Congratulations, Bobby.
Thank you.
It's amazing. You're an amazing, fascinating person. I love you very, very much. Tell us about your radio show that you
it's on WBGO, the #1 jazz station and beyond in the country. That means the world. It's called the Latin Jazz Cruise. It's on from 4 to 6
On
p.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. And if you can't listen in real time, you can just go to the archives, WBGO Latin Jazz Cruise. And you can listen worldwide, WBGO.org, O-R-G.
Terrific. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank
Thank you for all watching us here on The Radical Imagination. See you again next week.
Bien lo sabes, capullito de Alelí. Capullito de Alelí. Capullito. The good times roll all night long. Who taught you that and said it was love? I'm a genie in a bottle. You got to rub me the right way. Love is kind of crazy with a spooky little boy now.